Edward W. Holmes earned his bachelor's degree in elementary education from the State University College at Oneonta, New York, in 1963. Dr. Holmes worked in public education for 4 years. He came to Towson State College in 1971 and served as a faculty member and administrator for 28 years. These are his reflections.
Dr. Holmes, thank you for coming in and your willingness to share with us your own training, your preparation for becoming a teacher, and your experience here as a professional in the College of Education. This will certainly add significantly to what we are attempting to do, which is to document sort of the evolution of teacher education at Towson University. I think a good place to begin is with your early social context, your family, the area in which you grew up, kind of career plans that you were thinking about as you went through school, into high school, and the point in your life at which you thought maybe you might be interested in becoming a teacher. So start there.
All right. Well, I was born and raised in Portchester, New York, and I have two brothers, and we probably lived in what you might call an upper middle class neighborhood. I think the interesting thing for Stella and me, my wife and myself, we were from professional families. Our parents were all educated and worked professionally, and so I think that probably had something to do with who I am today, kind of thing. I did have a disability. I was born without a right ear, and so that probably made me a little different as a child, but I grew up in kind of a bubble situation. The elementary school I went to was a K-12. I graduated in a class of 13. It was a classic red brick schoolhouse. It still stands. It's now a daycare center, and the school system was a small one, and it bought the Herbert Lehman estate and built the elementary school that I finished in, and it was in what is now Rye Brook, because we really lived on the outskirts of Portchester, and then we paid to go into the Portchester school system and go to high school and all of that. And I was a member of the Future Teachers of America and all of that. And in truth, I was not a very good student, but I think I always thought about either being a teacher or an Episcopal priest. And so I went off to Dickinson College, and I was there for 2.5 years. And while I was there, I was a history major and an undeclared English major and a pre-theological student, but teaching was always in the back of my mind. So that's the beginning, I guess.
And you did not complete a degree at Dickinson?
No, I certainly didn't. My career is checkered. I'm undergraduate, well, from the time I was a little kid to the time I transferred to the State University College at Oneonta. I left Dickinson in some disgrace. I could have gone back after taking a semester off, but I ended up working for R.H. Macy's in White Plains, New York, and then decided to go to Oneonta and do things on my own. And of course, in that instance, I did think teaching, and I began to think about did I really want to be a high school teacher or maybe an elementary teacher? And I liked kids, and I'd been a lifeguard in a pool and worked with kids. I hadn't been a camp counselor, but I had those kinds of experiences. And so what I remember most about my training at Oneonta is there was a heavy emphasis on child growth and development, which incidentally was something I worked long and hard here to gain hold of. I was never successful. We pushed ed psych as opposed to child psych here, and the state too. So I mean, it was a universal down here. But anyway, that was something that I remember.
So you must have thought that was a significant part of your preparation.
Right, because we were, I met my wife at Oneonta, and the two of us went through classes together. We kind of did it. We were freshmen one semester, sophomores another semester, juniors another, and then finally got to the point where we could go student teaching, having fulfilled all of the requirements and whatever. But we used to laugh about, they were always saying to us, the child is an individual, and we would hear that ad nauseum. And I think truly we left believing that. And so in that sense, that was a major strand. And then the other issue that continues to be an issue is teaching an art or a science. And then I think for us now as retirees, we're living out the other thing that I think they talked about so much, that we're all lifelong learners, and so they played that up. That was a big thing. And actually Oneonta was a major teacher college, just as Towson was here. It was a premier institution. Small, very much like Towson was when I got here, but Charles W. Hunt was the president of Oneonta and was one of the founders of AACTE, for example, and ATE came out of all of that. Bob Stevenson, the first executive secretary, was a supervising teacher at Oneonta when, or I should say, a resident college supervisor at Oneonta when we were there. He and his former wife, Carol Stevenson, and I did our doctoral work together later, and so there were lots of connections. And in fact, my boss at Oneonta, that's getting ahead of the story, worked here briefly and knew many of the people here, which kind of helped me get here, I guess. But I think in terms of student teaching, I student taught in Gloversville, New York in 6th grade, which was an upper middle class school in the community. I then taught 2nd grade in Stamford, New York, which was in the country, so to speak, outside of Oneonta, where I worked with the rural poor. And I think for me, student teaching was kind of an epiphany. I realized that I was successful in the classroom. I had wonderful support, particularly in Gloversville and in Stamford too, to the extent that about 2 weeks after I was in Stamford, I got a call from Gloversville, would I come, and they didn't have a classroom for me, but if I would serve as an elementary librarian for a semester, they'd have a job for me. And I thought, well, that's not quite what I'm thinking, but it was a nice thought. And so anyway, what did happen while I was in Stamford, again, I got a call from the Mohawk Central School, and they needed a teacher there. One of their 6th grade teachers had dropped dead suddenly at the polls, and they needed a teacher. They had a substitute in the classroom, and I was all of 23, but when I went in for the interview, I said I wouldn't be coming unless I could bring my wife to be. We weren't even married, but we went there together, and I accepted the position with the proviso that there'd be one for Stella
Oh, my
in
heavens.
September, because if there wasn't, I couldn't stay, because we'd have to go where she was getting a job. So that was kind of unusual, I think, back. I mean, and I think about today, and it's also very different. But
Well, it sounds like you were confident.
yeah, and I think
leaving
people thought I
your-
was good, and I'd never had that kind of experience before, because I wasn't really the best student in the world. But I guess I would just march to a different drummer. I liked books, and I liked reading, and I knew lots of things, but I wasn't really good about sitting in a classroom straight and tall and doing everything that everybody wanted me to do. And so the teacher that I followed in Mohawk was, I guess, truly gifted. Obviously, I never knew her, but I got her classroom lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, they just left everything there for me. And she was into individualized instruction. Every child was doing something different. And in those days, your classroom was filled with children. Well, I can remember Flossie with a 60 IQ, and then I had some kids with 140, 150 IQs. And I'm sure some of them are very successful today somewhere. I'm not altogether certain where. But anyway, my first half year was I was in a bubble. I mean, everybody thought it was just wonderful that they had this new young male teacher, and his wife-to-be was coming in the fall, and they had hired one other young woman from Oneonta, and probably we were the first ones they'd had in the system in years. So we were just made to feel very special. Well, as I got into it over the next few years, I realized that I probably needed to know a whole lot more about reading instruction, and I needed to know a whole lot more about classroom discipline. Kids, I think, followed me pretty willingly, but things could get out of hand. And so I was one of those that had to work on that, I remember. And the kids kind of thought I was, because I was long and tall and lanky, sort of an Abraham Lincoln. I think that's what they called me behind my back. But anyway, I had a wonderful experience at Mohawk, and the following fall, I entered my classroom in January, and I had a great classroom. It had been a former kindergarten classroom, so it was bigger, it had more space. It was just a great place, and
Ed, what grade was that?
Grade 6.
Oh.
I was a 6th grade teacher. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah. And I'd had that experience
Yes.
in Gloversville, so
Yes.
I was ready for that. And that probably was good for me. Stella ended up teaching 2nd grade in Mohawk, and we both had done the same thing. She'd done 2nd grade in Richfield Springs, and then she did 6th grade in Frankfurt. They made certain that we were spread apart and could not be with each other during student teaching. But anyway, she always maintained that I was probably better with the older kids. And I think she's probably right. But the thing that happened right away is I began having student teachers from Oneonta.
Oh, my heavens.
And I was 23, 24. But I liked having the young people in my classroom. I had kids from Potsdam and from Oneonta. And both of the the supervising teachers or the resident college supervisors that came in were much older than I was, but they were very kind, and I guess they thought what I was doing was okay because they kept bringing them back. I mean, and I did enjoy doing that, and I really liked teaching. So the kids went away, and some of those young people then I'm still friends with today. So I mean, it was a wonderful experience. And I'd, in particular in Gloversville, had a wonderful woman that I worked with and remained friends with until she died. I mean, she was just a wonderful person. So I'd never had bad experiences, so I just tried to replicate what I remember. And then
So how long were you at
I was in Mohawk from '63 till June '67. What's that, about 3.5 years, as Stella likes to tell me all the time. How long did you actually teach it? But then I was asked to be a resident college supervisor at Oneonta, and I was a little astonished by that. They asked me the year before I took the job to do that, and I said, well, I can't. I haven't finished my master's. I was doing my master's at Cortland, and Stella was doing hers with me. And so in retrospect, afterwards, I realized that was really stupid. I should have gone to Oneonta because I could have finished my master's there. It wouldn't have cost me a dime, but I didn't do any of those things. I thought Cortland was smart because it was a different campus and another venue. And while we were at Cortland, one summer we went off and did the grand tour of Europe, something called Art in Europe. And that was all summer and 6 hours of credit in fine art or art history, I guess. Then I had an experience where we went to Colgate, and did Russian area studies. And then I had a math piece, modern math, which was at Cortland, but Cortland's program was such that in the 32 hours that I had to put together, I was able to come up with all these neat things that I like to do.
So the European trip and
the Colgate, that was all part of the master's.
Wonderful.
I built that in, and those were electives as compared to the education courses that we took. And I had a wonderful fellow that taught the supervision of education, and I bought his brand. He believed that as teachers in the community we had to look sharp and be sharp, and I always thought that was important. And so he said, you know, even if you don't have too much spare change, make sure your car is washed and you look good when you drive into the parking lot, and don't let them downplay what you're doing in the community. You're important. And so I always thought things like that were good. And so when I took the job at Oneonta, I remained in the Utica area near where I was living, and I met a wonderful woman from Oswego, Bernadette Eichler, and the two of us did sort of a mother-son routine. Let's see, I'm 73, she's 95, so she's still alive, and retired as the associate superintendent of schools in Utica at 90.
wow.
So she's still game and out there. We see her in Florida during the winter. Anyway, she and I had a kind of a partnership going where we would bring all of our supervising teachers together. Oftentimes we ended up using the same people at different times, but we both felt that the supervising teachers did so much for us and they didn't get a whole lot in return. We used to bring them back on campus once every semester, and I think they got all of $100 maybe. for their efforts. And of course, in those days, the salaries were much, much smaller than even they are today. But the thing was, Bernadette and I used to do things for our supervising teachers, and we'd go to area restaurants, and they oftentimes would they'd put on the meal and we'd have to pay for that, but they'd give us the space to do things, and so it was fun. And we got to go to some of the national and state conferences. So I remember one winter, this was nuts, but we took state cars and drove out to Chicago in a snowstorm to go to AACTE and ATE's conference. And it was wonderful. I think we warmed ourselves with some sort of Rotka scotch to keep us all going. But there was a group of guys that I drove with, and we had a good time. And it's at Oneonta that one of our good friends, Betty Jalbert, who was eventually dean about the time Billy was dean here. She was dean of the School of Education at Oneonta. But another person who just recently died this spring, but she's one of the people that got me thinking about the fellowship program at College Park. So that I was only at Oneonta 2 years, and I took a leave of absence, and I got into this fellowship in College Park. She was friends with Jim Collins. That Betty and Jim had gone to Syracuse together, and this was a triple T project where they brought people in from all over the country, and there were about 16 of us as fellows. And in truth, given my checkered academic career, I was an alternate. And so I didn't know until August, and Stella was expecting a baby, our second child, in September, that a lady in Maryland that was supposed to go as a part of the fellowship stepped out at the last minute. And so Stella and I decided, let's go for broke.
Yeah.
And so in a frenzied manner, we got rid of lots of stuff and moved to Hyattsville, Maryland. And then when we got to College Park, Gladys Wiggins, a kind of a Fred Arnold, but down in College Park in the College of Ed, said that there was no way I didn't have all my materials. I wouldn't be able to start school till January. Meanwhile, we had come down to Maryland, had an apartment, all of this, and so it all worked out. Yeah, right. But when I first got there, there was some question about whether all of my records were together, and
how did you work that out?
well, Jim Collins and David Young went to bat for me. I think I ended up taking the MAT, not the MAT. What is the Miller's analogies?
Oh, yes.
Remember those?
Yes.
Well,
it is the MAT.
Anyway, I had to take those, and I ended up, which is typical of me, I ended up with the highest scores of anybody in the fellowship. But it was a squeaker, and so with those scores, I was able to start classes in September with the gang. And it was a great group. I'm still very close friends with a fellow from Minnesota. He and his wife also came with a little toddler. And then 1 month to the day after Aline was born, Jan and Tom had their second child in October.
Wow.
And so it was, we were all close, and none of us had much money, but we had a good time. And as I look back on it, I was 27 when I went to Oneonta. I turned 30 in the fellowship when I was down there, and makes me think of the new superintendent coming to Baltimore County.
Which is
Anyway, the internship, not the internship, the fellowship was a 2-year and a summer project. We were paid for the 2 years and that summer. We did do an internship. Mine was at Collington Square here in Baltimore City. But most of the work that I did while I was taking coursework was in Montgomery County, in mostly upper middle class communities, public schools, but that's our high-end county, and I guess it still is for the most part.
So what did this involve? Were you training to become an administrator or
We were training,
public school
the Triple
administrator,
T
or-
project was training teachers of teachers.
Ah, okay.
And so that was actually some of the last of the Johnson money, where there was a great push to improve the public schools, and we've never had it so good. I look back on my career and think that really I was in it during the halcyon days, where there are a lot of good things happening to all of us. And I had some great experiences. Among other things, I was a tutor in a halfway house in the district. Stella used to say, "Do you really need to do something like that?" But I do think that I always had this need to work with people and kind of help them, bring them along. If they were smart, I figured they were going to make it if we could just provide them with ways to do that. And I'm not the world's best driver, but I remember just helping this young fellow learn how to drive, because he couldn't get a job without knowing something. He'd not finished school. He was African American. He lived with his grandmother, and we'd read almost anything from comic books to pornographic material, anything that would get his interest. I was okay with it. And I lost him. I mean, he didn't make it, but he was a smart young man. He just was drug based, and it was just the way it was. I had my major advisor, Louise Berman, had just come onto the campus about the time the fellows came. And so Carol Stevenson, Joyce Murphy, and myself, we were her first 3 doctoral students, of whom she's had many, of course, but she's now 84, and we just all gathered recently, about a month ago, in Howard County for a little celebration in her honor. But I also worked with Chandler Barber, because he was at College Park in those days, and he's the one who called and asked if I'd be interested in coming to Towson. And so I had the opportunity of either going to UMBC or coming here, and I thought Towson was the most like Oneonta, and my boss at Oneonta had been here with the likes of Maud Broyles and Jean Fitzgerald and all of those good souls that I met, Genevieve Hagney and all of them. So I just thought Towson for me made a better match, and I really fully expected to go back to Oneonta. And so I was on leave and from Oneonta. They gave me 2 more years because, of course, I didn't finish my doctoral program in those first 2 years. Because I had 2 kids, I thought a job would be better than working as a grad assistant for another semester, or I mean another year at College Park. And I think while it made things harder, it was a good thing. But
So this program, the Triple T program, was that a doctoral program, or did that just sort of morph into your getting a doctorate?
The coursework was all geared toward a doctorate. But it was also, you could walk away with one of those certificates of advanced study. And so there were, in fact, some folks that did that. But for the most part, I'd say most of us stayed on and completed programs. And that was another turning point, because again, that was a group of people that I'm still closely connected to. There's a Ursuline's sister in Wilmington that I'm still very close to. We'll see her for lunch on Tuesday. Every time we pass through Florida, we go through and see the Healy's. Tom finished his doctoral work before I did and went to the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, and now ultimately became the associate provost of the university system. So he and the guy he worked with started from the ground floor, kind of like UMBC, and so it's been an interesting group of people. And of course, Joyce was here working with all of us. She went to UMBC and then ended up at the State Department of Education. So anyway, I think the program was a very good one. Again, they sent us all over the country. We went to conferences all over. It was just a great experience. And then I became very close to Dolores Harvey, who was the Teacher Ed Center coordinator for College Park in Baltimore City. And I did my internship with her, but we've remained friends since then. So it's just all these people, we all coalesced and just made a life together in this field, and it's been good. Let's see, what else can I tell you about the fellowship? I think I said Chandler asked us to come to Towson, and so I actually came here in 1971, and my first school was Berkshire Elementary School down in Dundalk. And I worked with Virginia Russell, who was principal there, and I was there, I guess, 4 years. And I absolutely loved the school. I followed Dick Williams. I had a way of following him all over campus, but he was their first college supervisor. Yeah. And he had come down from Harford County and he joined Towson in 1970. I came in 1971. There was a whole group of us that were hired in the 70s. Alex Flangus, Dick Williams, Joe Sahorsky, myself in 71. I think Bonnie Blake came in that period of time. There was just a whole gang. And so I'm not certain that Dick's forte was the Teacher Ed Center there at Berkshire. And so as soon as he could, he came back on campus. And I think shortly thereafter, I guess he was made department head for
Elementary?
3 years, 4 years, I'm not sure. And then after that, he was in the graduate program and pretty much over there. And ultimately, I followed him for that too. But
Ed, could you tell us a little bit about what a student teaching center was and the reason for deciding to do a center kind of setup?
Well, the beautiful part of it was instead of being a resident college supervisor like I'd been at Oneonta, where I would go from school to school and see people intermittently. And I'd create a cycle and make sure I saw everybody pretty routinely and frequently. But this was a situation where anywhere from 16 to 20 kids from the campus went directly to the school, and we would create assignments from kindergarten to 6th grade. And I also was able to work out with the special area teachers, although our elementary kids weren't certified in special areas. I gave them the opportunity to work with the art teacher or the phys ed teacher or the music teacher if they wanted to. Kindergarten, I don't think that was part of our certification here. It was because we didn't have kindergarten when I first got here.
It wasn't required by law.
Right, and so kindergarten, there were kindergartens in the building, and so if kids wanted to work with kindergarten, I could get them a week or 2 weeks doing that. So that I could create a program for a student whereby they had a primary experience and an intermediate experience of, say, 6 and 6, and then another 2 weeks they could do something else, or a week and a week. And
So these were this is a student teaching center, so this was that
Right.
student teaching experience.
Right. In addition to which, they also took 6 hours of instruction with me, so that I was doing that with them, not just the seminars that I did at Oneonta to bring them all together once a week. This was classwork. And then the thing that happened, when I first got there, Dick had been assigned, the building was full, and he'd been assigned the end of the upper hall. And he had what I called Susie Wong beads that kind of allowed him to go into his little bailiwick. And I took those down right away. I said, Dick, I can't do that. And then shortly thereafter, they gave me a classroom, which I had for the entire time I was there.
Wonderful.
So they moved in some furniture, and so one end of the classroom was a classroom for me and my students, but then there was a place where people could have lunch, and I always had a pot of coffee going for people. And so teachers as well as student teachers came in and used it as sort of the upper, the second story faculty room, which I encouraged and wanted people to do. And so there was that kind of thing going on. And then that was good because if there were teachers in the building who didn't really want a student, I had a reading teacher directly across from me who was hell on wheels, and I made it my
Your mission?
my mission to win her over, and I did. She became one of my greatest supports because she would prepare all kinds of nifty things for the students. She had unbelievable files, and she would create things for my students, and ultimately she even let people come in and work with her. And so she was marvelous. And I don't think she's living any longer, but she used to be over here at the Versailles Apartments, and she'd even have the kids over ultimately. So it was a neat thing. But she was not pleased that I was there in the beginning, but we won her over. It was fun. But the thing was, I ended up being able to do things for supervising teachers, and so I created with Baltimore County in-service courses, and I also brought courses from Towson there in the supervision of student teachers. And well, as recently as about the time I retired, recently, that's 1998, but Tom Profit, Marilyn Nicholas, and I were still doing those supervision of student teaching courses out in the schools in Baltimore County. And so I either did them for the county and their in-service courses, or I'd do ours. But I always had things going for the teachers. If they wanted a course, we'd try to get it for them, and either through the county or through the university, and we'd have it right there in the classroom, and it would be great, and I'd be sitting in with them and participating and all of that. So those Berkshire days were wonderful, and it provided me with a contact in the Baltimore County schools. Ultimately, of course, Stella was in the Baltimore County schools, having come from Baltimore City, but later on, I was actually a member of the school board in Baltimore County, and so I had this ongoing connection. And I think Towson, being the institution it was in this area, there was just this interchange between the county and the university because you could go to every building and there were probably 6 or 7 people who had been to Towson. Mm-hmm. If they hadn't gone as undergraduates, they got their masters, or they'd at least taken some courses. And so there was always that connection, which was great for me. And it worked out later because here you are sitting here. You would go to Sandy Plains for Stella in her building before she retired. And Pat Waters went down there and did things. So we had all kinds of things going. And because people trusted me on that side, they would allow us to do things in Stella's school that probably didn't get done in other places. And in a way, I guess the teacher education centers are the forerunner of today's, what do we call them now?
PDS, Professional Development
Schools. Right, because in a sense, that's what we were doing then, but we didn't have all of the funding and that sort of thing that seems to be out there for these PDSs today. So there's been a natural evolution, I think, in the training of teachers. And I think more and more over time, people became convinced that if you wanted good teachers, you needed to help the supervising teachers perfect their skills so they could do what needed to be done. Then for me, at age 35, I became the department head in elementary education. And that was a wonderful time. For me, I think what I attempted to do, I don't know if it always worked, but I antagonized some of the staff in those early days because I said we needed to upgrade the curriculum and redo the program, undergraduate and graduate. And I think I even, in a very authoritarian way, said that all of us had to create a course or 2 or more before the year was out. We were going to create and begin working them through the curriculum committees and things that needed that the courses needed for their approval and so on. But we did do quite a lot of that.
What made you decide that you needed that kind of sea change in the programs, both graduate and undergraduate?
Well,
what was not there that you were hoping to make?
The thing that I wanted, and I never got, was I wanted the state and I wanted the university in my department in the College of Ed to, while I thought Ed Psych was a great course, I thought it was a graduate course. I didn't see it as an undergraduate course. I thought we needed child psych. Now, you can make an argument both ways, and they always won here. It was Ed Psych. But I think that the child is an individual thing that we got all the time at Oneonta was something I hoped we'd ultimately get here. And we did have, like Roger Fink taught child psych, and we had it as an elective and encouraged students to take it. But oftentimes the programs were so packed it was hard to get the electives in. But I think those kids that did take child growth and development probably had a better handle on discipline. And interestingly enough, our classroom discipline course, I think it's still on the books, was constructed by a supervising teacher of mine at Berkshire. Karen Wagner created the course. She never came to teach it. Others here on campus taught the course. But she tried to construct the course in such a way that it would make sense to kids and to their teachers so that you could work through that issue of classroom management and discipline. And really, I guess that's the word, isn't it? Management, not discipline. But hey, whatever works.
Over time.
But the thing, I guess what I thought sometimes was lacking here at Towson was there was kind of a myopic view of things. Everything was either in Baltimore County or here on the campus. And so I was very active in the national organizations. I believe strongly in NCATE, went through the training, served on NCATE teams, brought all that back because we had to have those evaluations done periodically. But I'm not sure everybody took all of that very seriously. But I think the governance of a university, whether it be in teacher education or law or business or whatever, is pretty important, that you create standards and all of that. So I thought that it was important to be in the organizations off campus, but I also felt it was important to participate on campus. And I think the thing that allowed me to do that was early on, as a way of supplementing my income during the summer, was I was part of the triad staff, which was the old orientation staff. And Bill Ruling and Larry Yateman were ones. He was the registrar, Larry was his assistant during the summer, but we did the orientation for our students coming in, and there was a collection of us from every department. So I got to know people outside of elementary ed or the College of Ed or whatever. And that allowed me to serve on committees and do things. I was in the, gosh, what did we call it? Not the Senate, University Senate.
Right.
It was the college, something in the beginning.
It was the Faculty Senate.
Faculty
originally,
Senate.
a long time ago.
Right. So I had those connections, and then I felt that the work on the school board, and I was also an active churchman, and for some 19 years I was on something called the Commission on Ordained Ministry, and so I was working with people going into the ministry like people were going into teaching, and so I ultimately got that in too, so that I always thought that and I still think teaching is a service profession. And so I guess that's where the art comes in. I think you have to have a compassion for people and an attempt to understand who they are and walk in their shoes, if you will. Whether they're little kids like my grandson Charlie with Down syndrome or anyone else for that matter. And so I thought, and I used to tell my students, you need to get experiences. Backpack around Europe, do something that will just change your life. And because I think for Stella and me, our grand tour that summer that we went to Europe was mind bending for us. I always loved the arts, I still do. Theater, music, all of that is tremendously important to me, and I was always saying to the kids, you've got to get out and see that play. A movie's good, but a play is better. Go to the Lyric and hear opera, go down and see a symphony and whatever. And I think what I was hoping is that they'd get the big picture and sort of see things in a gestalt as opposed to step by step, grinding it out kind of thing. And so in that view at the master's level, I thought, and I still think, there is a need for supervisors, people who are not administrators. They may be administrating things, but a supervisor on the side can help someone see things, and there's less threat coming from an administrator who says, yeah, I really thought that was a lousy lesson. And that administrator may or may not know very much about teaching or whatever, but they have to go through that process. And so a supervisor, I hoped, had the background, and I think that's what we got in that fellowship, the training to do that sort of thing. Because I used to discuss, I'll say, or fight with Tom Profit. He and I both agreed that the PDS was a vital step forward. But where it fell down for me is we put some of our people in PDSs and they hadn't a clue as to what they were doing. They were specialists. They might have been reading specialists, or they might have been, I don't know, whatever. And they just really had no idea about how to work with teachers and get them to understand the things they could do to help an incoming teacher, that kind of thing. So there were...
Were you sensing this as early as when you were serving as chair of elementary?
Oh yeah, from the beginning, because that's really where the Triple T project came from.
I see.
I always thought that we needed to do things for supervising teachers. The pay, I mean, everybody wants a few extra dollars, I understand that, but I think they needed support. I think they needed coursework that they wanted that would help them, and I didn't think they needed to necessarily pay for it. If they already had their masters, then we should provide things that would be interesting to them. And I think Pat Waters just going in and working with parents at Sandy Plains, that was helpful to teachers because it helped the teachers if the parents knew a little bit more about how they could be a better school parent. I just think sometimes conversations about what you're doing when you're doing it can be very, very fruitful. And if an administrator or someone is leading that discussion, there's an element of threat there. You're doing it because you have to.
And you're being evaluated.
Right. Right, and so if you can get away from that and take that off the table, then I think you've got some good things going. And so that was, I think, where I was coming from, and I think that was the basis for a lot of what I did here. I thought it was important to go to conferences and whatever and bring that back to my students, the teachers I was working with, undergraduate or graduate. I have to say, I did have a period after manning the NCATE and NASDAQ and all of the things that I did for a number of years here, because that's one of the beauties of this job for me, was I had so many different opportunities to do different things, and I loved that part of it, which kept me here. I had a family here, and I had a wife who was working in the area. It was a perfect match. We had a great thing going. But when I think about the the teachers that I worked with, or the courses that I taught, or whatever, the things that I could bring in from the outside, I thought that was good. So the state boards and the state committees and all of the things that I ended up doing. And I think in teacher education, we're number two. We try harder. If you're an English professor, you might say, well, why are you doing all of that? You should be reading your books, you should be writing an article, you should be doing this, or you should be doing that. All true, I think. However, for those of us in teacher education, we have a responsibility to be a part of the community and bring that back to the classroom and take the classroom to the community. It works both ways, it's cyclical. And so I think that was an underlying theme that I had throughout my time. And it went on as far back as being in Utica, working with Bernadette. We both felt that that was something that was very important to then, I think, help teachers see how important they were in terms of the community and what they were doing.
And driving a clean car.
Yeah, right.
As early as that recommendation.
Right. I don't think I used to say much about driving a clean car. I was just glad if they could get to class and had a car. But anyway, I used to say to kids that many of them were indeed the first ones in their families to get a college education. And their family would be very proud of them and would be very pleased with all they did. But there would also be a divide that would arise between them and their family. Their education would separate them from some of the things that families did. And if mother and dad weren't educated and you suddenly came on with your fine airs and you knew all about everything, that wasn't going to go very far either. And so we needed to create a balance and remember to be compassionate with everyone that we encountered, and that we were going to get lots of little duffers in our classrooms that needed a lot of help to just live day to day. And it might start with breakfast. So, it's just the way it was. I guess the thing that I think about now is that for me, this has been, or I guess I have to say now, it was a wonderful life. I really enjoyed my work. And I think as a lifelong learner, I've also had a wonderful retirement. I'm sure there are people in my cluster of friends who just marvel at the fact that I could walk off this campus, 13 years ago, and not really return. I'm in touch with lots of people, but I'm not wandering the halls, looking back. I have moved forward, and Stella and I have had a wonderful retirement. And I think we've had a wonderful lifestyle. We may not have made tremendous amounts of money, but even though Governor Christie in New Jersey would say that our pensions are way too big, or that we don't need all of these social network pieces that we have, Social Security and Medicare and our Obama health plan and whatever. I think I'm living a lifestyle that comes from working hard, putting money aside, and living well today. I don't know if it's going to happen for our kids or our grandkids. That's a worry, but I think Oneonta and Towson gave me kind of a mantle, if you will. And I took it very seriously. I think I attempted to be professional throughout my life. I took what I was doing seriously. And I think as a consequence, there was a certain, there was a return from the community. There was a weight there that it worked. For us in the county, for us here at the university, and vice versa. And I don't know if that's true today. I read the papers and wonder if there's that same kind of connection that we once had. You're looking into and visiting the various retirement communities in this area, and I certainly think you're meeting up with people who had that kind of sense of this was a good life, and we made a contribution, and that kind of thing. And so for me, I have a legacy here. Claire is working in this building. Her husband is working down in the College of Ed. And so for me, this place opened doors. For me, my family, my wife, because she got her 60 hours here. She used the things that we had to offer and provided us with a stage to do a number of things. So it was a win-win for me. It always has been. And all of my friends really are from my Towson days. Dick Williams, Alex Flangus, Fran Bond, Marilyn Nicholas. I mean, the list goes on and on. You and George, and so there you are. I mean, we've just had a good time together through the years, and so I highly recommend it. And I hope there are still young people out there. I meet them now and then. Who are still saying, I'd like to be a teacher. And I jump on that when I hear it.
And that's the last thing that I think we wanted you to comment on was, what do you say to young people who are considering a career in education, teacher?
I think if I use my own life as an example, and I'll even use Claire, because this is a good one. She used to sit at the dining room table and hear our stories and say that not on your life would I ever be a teacher. You spend far too much time at this, and it's true, we did. It is a round-the-clock, 24/7 occupation, and I don't deny that, but it's so fulfilling that it sustained us all the time we did it. I don't, sometimes we'd grumble because of time crunches, but Stella and I did not grumble about the work we had to do. We went off and did it, and it's true, we had each other to bounce things off, and so it was perhaps easier. We had a lot of built-in support. But with Claire, she did go off and become a librarian. Aline is an occupational therapist. Aline, I think, picked up on the service angle before Claire did. Claire was really a little blue stocking as a child, a serious reader and all of that. But now that, and then ultimately decided on library school, and we encouraged that. It made sense, and so we thought that would be good for her. And so she worked in Albany, New York, and then got a job with the United Nations in Vienna, Austria, so that she had that wonderful experience outside of the country, and she's our child with wanderlust. Aline wouldn't cross the block, it'd be too far away. But Claire would go anywhere and do anything, and it's ironic that she's ended up here when she never expected to do that. But anyway, she loves her job here at the library, but she confessed recently, oh, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that one of her favorite parts of the job were the classes that she taught, helping kids use the library. And Stella and I kind of high-fived each other on that when we heard that, because it meant that it clicked with her too. And I think for the young people that I've worked with and the ones who, and I'm still in touch with some of the kids that I've worked with, they just, if you give it a chance and are clear about what you're trying to do, it's a very worthwhile, fulfilling profession. And I do think it's a profession. I know there are people who are out there questioning that, but I do think for those of us who've had the opportunity, salaries notwithstanding, because that's always a question, I would highly recommend it. And there, down the street from us is a little Italian restaurant, and their daughter has just completed her teacher ed program. And I can see her being a teacher. There is something about her that says teacher, just as there's something about Claire that says library. So I do think there's a little of that in all of this, but it was good.
Thank you, Ed.